Coming up today, when cancer risks runs in the family. Meet a survivor whose diagnosis was no surprise based on her family history. Plus, the experimental vaccine that might be able to prevent certain cancers. Good morning, I'm Jessica Lovell, and welcome to the Morning Medical Update. Lori Chavez shares a family trait that goes back generations. It's a trait that no one wants to have, but she's hoping a clinical trial that she entered will save future generations from the pain she has endured.
That was his dog, Egypt, and his dog passed away a year before my dad did.
Lori Chavez wished her dad could have beat the family odds.
My uncle, who was my dad's youngest brother, he was diagnosed with colon cancer at 38. And my grandpa had a history of colon and prostate.
But she somehow knew it would be her turn.
I had trouble with my stomach. I've always felt it was a genetic thing. I have an older sister, 4 years older. She had previously been diagnosed. We knew that she had the Lynch gene.
And after testing, Lori learned that she also had Lynch Syndrome, an inherited predisposition that puts carriers at a much higher risk of colon and other cancers. In 2018, she found out she too had colon cancer.
I wasn't surprised.
She came to the University of Kansas Cancer Center.
They removed my whole colon, so a total colonectomy, and then at the same time did the complete hysterectomy. I was done having kids. I was all for that. Like, I was okay with that. I could grasp that better than having my colon removed.
But Lori looks on the bright side of her diagnosis and treatment path.
I go a lot more frequently to the bathroom, and so I don't ever have those like really bloated days, or like I don't deal with constipation.
And she found peace through her personal loss and own diagnosis by helping to find answers. Last year, she entered a clinical trial.
I like to talk to people about it and like why I wanted to do the vaccine trial, because I watched all my kids at different stages, see different family members go through it. And it sucks for everybody.
Lori wants the loss of her grandfather, uncle, and now father to be a path to better outcomes for her own children and beyond. And we are so glad to have Lori with us here in studio today. Good to see you.
Hi, thank you.
And right next to me, we are also joined by Dr. Ed Ellerbeck, who is an internal medicine doctor and researcher who happens to live with Lynch syndrome himself. Always good to see you.
Good to be here.
And we also have Dr. AJ Bansal. He is a gastroenterologist and medical director of the GI Cancers Prevention Clinic at the University of Kansas Cancer Center. We're going to learn about his research into a vaccine that we hope will help people living with Lynch syndrome. Dr. Bansal, good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, Lori, when did you first discover that you had Lynch syndrome?
I actually found out about 4.5 years ago. I was pretty sure my sister tested positive when I was pregnant with my youngest, who's almost 6 now. And so I just had to wait until after I delivered him, and then I was able to get the genetic testing
And
done.
with this family history that we just talked about in your story, you just had this feeling that it was coming.
So that I wasn't surprised at all, yeah.
So how long after did you discover that you then had cancer?
It was within the same year, and COVID, it was right when COVID happened, and so that kind of delayed. But I found out at the beginning of the year that I was actually Lynch positive, and then I wasn't able to get in to do my colonoscopy until September.
What prompted you to get the testing for Lynch syndrome? Was it because of the family history, or were you starting to have symptoms that you thought might be colon cancer?
No, it was really just the family history, and once my sister tested positive, the immediate family was offered the genetic test, and so that's my dad. Even though he had had colon cancer years prior, he went ahead and did the test just to almost solidify, what we kind of knew. And then, like I said, after I delivered, then I got the genetic test also.
I want to show a picture of your dad and your 2 uncles, which looks very similar to the photo we showed of your sisters and you, because 2 sisters test positive for Lynch. And was that the same with your father and his brothers?
So no, my dad and then his one brother both were positive, and then he has a brother and a sister that were negative.
Dr. Banzel, is that just random? Why would one sibling get, two siblings have it, one not? Any connection?
So that is correct. It's just completely random. So as we know that we inherit 2 copies of each gene, one gene from our father and one gene from our mother. So it's just random chance. So there's a 50% chance of having passing on Lynch syndrome to the next generation if you have it.
So what was treatment like for you? And tell us your treatment path.
Well, mine was surgery. Was really I just didn't have an option. So I knew that was coming, and it was really I didn't have much time to even think about it. So I really just had to get used to what it was going to be like not having a colon.
And you mentioned the idea of not having a colon was way worse than the idea of having a hysterectomy.
Yes, and I guess just because you meet so many people that have had hysterectomies, you hear about it a lot more, and you don't hear about or probably meet too many people that have had their whole colon removed. And so it seemed really scary. And
well, very few people have to do both, let alone one.
True.
So what gave you hope during this time? You know, you'd watch so many family members go through it. I know you have young children. We're going to get to that in just a bit. But what kept you going?
I really just felt like a lot had changed. And like my uncle used to tell my aunt if he could just live long enough, like medicine would catch up and like he would be able to survive. But he just needed like a couple more years. And I've seen how much stuff has changed since he first got sick. And yeah, so everybody just needs a little bit more time. And so the earlier that you find out, either if you carry the gene or that you might have early stage cancer, it's always better outcome.
So let's explain Lynch syndrome a bit more. It's one of the most common hereditary cancer syndromes out there, right up there with the BRCA genes. An estimated 1 in every 279 people have it. So not super common, but not completely rare. It's caused by a DNA mutation on certain genes, and it increases the risks of developing certain kinds of cancer. In this case, we talked about colorectal cancer. Dr. Banzel, if someone has Lynch syndrome, how much does it increase the risk of them developing cancer?
That's a very good question. So what happens is Lynch syndrome happens because of one of 4 genes. So depending on the type of gene you inherit from or the type of gene which runs in your family, the risk can run anywhere between 30 to 80% lifetime. If you have the highest risk gene, then the lifetime risk of colon cancer can reach 80%.
So if you were just a high-risk cancer individual versus someone with Lynch syndrome, how much higher risk are you than just your average high-risk patient?
So yes, that's a good question. So just to put the risk in perspective, and we don't want to scare people about the risk per se, but the risk of colon cancer lifetime in the general population is approximately 4 to 5%. So that's the risk in my regular high-risk clinic patients with other gene mutations is around 10 to 15%. With Lynch, it can go up to 30 to 80%. So approximately 3 to 10-fold increase.
So let's talk about how it's inherited. Will all children of a Lynch syndrome carrier parent also develop Lynch syndrome?
No. So as I explained earlier, for each gene we carry 2 copies. So one we inherit from our mother and the other from our father. So it's just random which gene gets passed on to the next generation. So the chance of passing on the gene of Lynch syndrome to the next generation is 50% of 1 in 2.
So Dr. Ellerbeck, you have quite a unique perspective because a big part of your career has been about preventing cancer. Tell us a little bit about your family history.
So we don't have near the number of people in our family that Lori's had with cancer in the family. Maybe, unfortunately, because so many people died of heart disease at a young age.
That's what you mentioned.
But the first cancer that occurred was my mother. When I was in my first year of medical school, she developed ovarian cancer and died fairly quickly. And it turns out there are a number of other cancers associated with Lynch syndrome besides just colorectal cancer. And we really didn't think much more about it at that point in time. This is also 50 years ago. Until my brother, who at age 53 was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. And unfortunately, he was uninsured at the time, did not have colorectal cancer screening, which everybody should be getting now. but then passed away at age 55. And then it's not a classic risk profile, but with the ovarian cancer in my mother and the colorectal cancer in my brother, we kind of looked at my risk profile, and I went ahead and got the genetic screening and found out that I had Lynch syndrome, and then we went and used that to get other people in the family tested.
So that's interesting. So what did you think when you found that you were you surprised to learn that you had the Lynch syndrome gene, or did it feel empowering to know just to be more control?
I was concerned. I mean, because ovarian cancer is not the most common, and putting that with the young onset colorectal cancer, there was concern that there was an increased risk. And then doing the genetic testing and finding out, I think you're right, it was empowering, understanding what that was. And it also was particularly empowering being able to help other people in my family understand what their risks might be.
Well, you talk about the concern. It is concerning to me that Lynch syndrome doesn't cause symptoms until you have cancer. So how can you detect it early?
Well, the most important thing is for people who have colorectal cancer to get tested. And I think testing of individuals with colorectal cancer in the past was fairly sporadic, but I think that's improved substantially. Is that right, Dr.?
Absolutely. So, in fact, in the future, as genetic testing is getting cheaper and cheaper and all the molecular methods are getting cheaper, what will happen is all of us or a child at birth will undergo universal genetic testing for many syndromes, including Lynch. But we're not there yet because of all the downstream implications it has for healthcare of those individuals. So typically, family history is a big clue. So one of the biggest, so most doctors are busy, most nurse practitioners are busy, more PAs are busy, but we really have to spend a couple of minutes with our patients getting a good family history. I recall this incident when I used to do clinics for medical students in New York, and there was this medical student who was 19 who came to me for eye problems. But I always took family history, that was my habit. And when I asked her, she had 7 family members with colon cancer or uterine or ovarian or rectal. So it's the same day I made a call to one of our geneticists, got her into clinic for Lynch syndrome, and got her diagnosed at the age of 19, so we could be much more proactive. And I recently met her at a conference, and she was very thankful. So family history is very key for all medical personnel to take, nurses, doctors, NPs, PAs. And second is at KU and most other hospitals in the country, now we have a policy that any new cancer diagnosed at KU are screened for Lynch for the past, I believe, 10 years. And for the past 5 years, all uterine cancers are also screened for Lynch. So at least we are not missing any Lynch patients at KU.
So genetic testing is key, just your preventative screenings. I'm putting you on the spot. Were you getting your colonoscopies? You wouldn't be the first physician that said that they weren't all over it. We expect you to be, but it's not always the case.
It was right about the same time.
Okay, but how about now?
Maybe 2 years late.
How about now? Are you doing good?
Now we're getting the regular one. Dr. Mansell is very persistent, making sure I show up on an annual basis.
Okay, good deal. We're going to be all over it.
And it has me much more enthused about recommending screening for my patients.
Yes,
and you know, it's frustrating. My brother would still be here with us if he had gotten the early screening.
So kind of you do it in the name of your brother, and I'm sure that, I know, Lori, you felt the same way, and that's why you entered your trial, which we'll get to in a moment. Have you met with a genetic counselor? What is that like, and what kind of conversations do you have?
I did at the very beginning. I actually met with her before I could even get tested, because like I mentioned, I was pregnant at the time that my sister was diagnosed and was tested. So I'd actually met with her and had a couple of conversations with her prior to getting tested, and she was really just helpful in navigating through KU system, and I think she actually was the person that told me about a Lynch syndrome Facebook group, and that really is what helped me kind of make the decision on, not that you didn't about my surgery, but I was really torn between taking my whole colon or just doing the part that needed to be taken out, and so talking with people on that group helped me
I can imagine.
To kind of make the decision and hearing real people's stories about what they went through after surgery and stuff.
So you have to talk to your kids. Got 3 of them.
Yes.
So what are those conversations like? I'm sure you have told them that mom's going to be all over you, getting these screenings coming up and eventually getting some sort of genetic testing.
Yes. So my oldest, he actually has been tested. he was negative. And then my two youngest, they're just too young to be tested. And so they definitely will if I have anything to do with it by the time, when they turn 18. And I'm doing this because I'm hoping by the time they're able to get tested, if they are positive, they can just turn around and there's a vaccine.
Hold that thought, because I want to get to that. And I saw, Dr. Banzel, you gave a thumbs up when she said that her son had been tested negative. Once you're tested negative, you're always negative.
Yes, that is correct.
One and done test. Okay, so be sure to ask your questions. If you can go to the YouTube or Facebook chat, you can email the Medical News Network. All of that information is right there on your screen. So let's talk about the clinical trial involving this potential vaccine. And just to clarify, this is still being researched, Dr. Banzel. What are you testing in this vaccine? What are you hoping to find?
Absolutely. So these are cancer vaccines which were developed at the NCI many years ago by a scientist named Jeffrey Schlom. And these vaccines were supposed to target three main genes and antigens and proteins involved with colorectal cancers and perhaps other cancers in the human body. So by testing these three vaccines in combination with an immune booster to generate high quality immune cells in the body, almost like generating 24/7 bodyguards for against cancer, we are hoping to decrease the risk of colorectal cancer. But one of the secondary things we are looking at is the risk of ovarian, uterine, stomach, and pancreas, other cancers, because the same proteins which are involved in causing cancer in the colon, some of those proteins are also involved in causing cancer in other organs. So we are hoping for a global effect of the vaccines on cancer risk in Lynch. Obviously, it's still experimental. We still have to complete the research to really know how it went.
And to be clear, it's also intended for people living with Lynch syndrome only, correct?
Correct, at this point.
And what phase of the trial?
So we are in a phase 2 trial right now.
Okay. And then what?
Go ahead.
No, please.
So each treatment for cancer or for prevention has to go through 3 phases: phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 3 is the final phase, after which we start implementing it on the population level. So right now we are in phase 2, and if this shows a good signal, then we'll go to phase 3.
And Lori, you're part of this trial. What was that like for you to enter into that? Any hesitation, or were you all a go?
I was ready for it. I think that was one of the first questions Dr. Banzel had asked me was, if anything ever comes up, would you be interested? And I think about a year and a half went by, and I was like, hey, I haven't heard anything. And then I finally got an email, and I replied so fast. It was just a no-brainer for me.
And I think we discussed when we talked just the idea that you're able to be a part of the future, people of your children and your children's children's generations.
Yeah.
Exciting time in science. So Dr. Ellerbach, just on the big picture, how has better understanding of human DNA just improved cancer research and prevention? I mean, this has been your life's work. You've watched your mother and your brother pass away from cancer, so the idea of a vaccine must be very exciting.
Oh, it's incredibly exciting. I mean, the fundamentals about the inheritance of Lynch syndrome are fairly straightforward. We've known those types of DNA transmission of the risk for a long time. But the precision medicine that Dr. Banzel's engaged in with thinking about how we can target cancer risk at the molecular level is absolutely fascinating. And that's part of the reason why I've been really excited about being part of this research. I get to be on the other side of the research perspective, and just being involved with cancer researchers who are so enthusiastic about their work just makes you feel like you're part of the team. So. And
he's been a pretty well-behaved participant.
I know, that's what I was going to say. Doctors, you got to check on them as patients sometimes, so they're not always number one. Yes. you got to prod them a little bit. But Dr. Banzel, where would you like to see the field advancing over the next 5, 10, 15 years down the road?
So absolutely. So one thing I'm hoping for, even though I do colonoscopies and I'm a gastroenterologist, I'm hoping that patients with Lynch need less colonoscopies and less frequent colonoscopies, and maybe like the general population. So we are really hoping that by testing this vaccine, and there are other vaccines coming down the pipeline in the next few years, we are hoping to decrease the number of colonoscopies. We are hoping to help women who are requiring this risk-reducing surgeries, hysterectomy, oophorectomy at a young age, which can have consequences on heart health, bone health. We are hoping that we can decrease the need of those procedures and surgeries.
Let's get to some questions from our viewers this morning. And Becca wants to know, how often does a patient with Lynch syndrome have cancer reappear down the road?
So the risk is quite variable. Again, it depends on the genotype, that's why we have to really do genetic testing for precision medicine, as Dr. Ellerbeck mentioned. By knowing the gene, we can exactly calculate the future risk. But again, the risk of another second cancer happening in the future, and that's one of the main things we are trying to prevent, is anywhere between 20 to 60%.
Stuart is asking, if I get Lynch syndrome, I test positive, but I do not yet have cancer, what does that mean? What kind of prevention should I be doing? And should I be getting to my doctor? What's the next step?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jess. So the two main cancers we do worry about in Lynch are colon and uterus, and to some extent ovarian. So these are the biggest common cancers in Lynch. Some of it also depends on the family history. So we really have to involve a geneticist or a good person who can take a detailed family history, because some cancers tend to run in one family. For example, one family will have a lot of colon, another family will have a lot of ovarian. So somehow there's some risk modifiers in your genome which are affecting that. So in patients who have Lynch but do not have cancer yet, they should definitely undergo regular colonoscopies where we can remove polyps, diagnose early stage cancers, and then they should talk to a GYN oncologist or the gynecologist about risk-reducing surgery, the timing of which has to be determined based on each individual's perspective.
Jeremy has a question. If Lynch syndrome increases the likelihood of some cancers so predictably high, does that mean that CAR T-cell therapy, which we've talked about a bunch here on this program, could be used to train cells to be looking for those types of tumors or cancers more proactively?
That's a great question, and I love that question. So vaccine is a much cheaper way of doing CAR T therapy and much less toxic. So what CAR T therapy does is that it takes out T cells from the human body, retrains them in the lab to find those precancerous and cancer cells and to get rid of those before they turn into cancer or invade. Vaccines exactly are intended to do the same thing, that by exposing the human immune system to these cancer antigens, we can generate these T cells inside the body, so they can circulate inside the body, live in the body, memory T cells, which can prevent future cancer by by getting rid of the cells before they turn into big cancers.
Amy wants to know, where does the name Lynch syndrome come from? Who's that named after?
It's named after Henry Lynch, and all of this research happened in the Midwest at Creighton University. So I don't know if you have time, but I could tell you a brief story about how this came to be. So in approximately 1890s, there was a pathologist in Michigan. He had this seamstress who used to stitch his clothes. Apparently that was the thing at the time. So she would come, and apparently she was very bright. So what she did was, the time she had between stitching clothes, she would write down a family history in a chart, and then she would come and talk to this doctor saying that, I'm going to die in the next 5 years, but I'm very happy to work for you. And she would just talk about it. And then he made a family history of all her family, and there were 25 family members going back 10 generations or 5 generations who had all these cancers. So he told the world that, guys, something is going on, genetics is involved, but nobody believed him in 1898. And then this work went by the wayside. Then Henry Lynch was very young and didn't really listen to people, did his own thing. He then got all of those people together in one room. So apparently he got funding from the NIH. And apparently at that time, people did not really move very far from where they grew up. So he was able to get 290 people in that room, collected their blood, and they started doing sequencing, and which was very primitive at the time, and discovered that there was an area of the genome which was involved. The precise gene still needed time to be determined, but he basically proved that there is a genetic component to these cancers. So he's called the father of cancer biology. He passed away a few years ago, but apparently he was one of the most dedicated researchers and a giver. And he never really cared about fame and other things. He just wanted to make progress in this field.
Great story time, Dr. Bansal, this morning. I like that story. Dr. Ellerbeck, what's the big takeaway from just what we're learning, but your personal story as well?
Well, I think the idea is, if you have, well, first off, colorectal cancer screening is very important for everybody, regardless of whether or not you have a Lynch syndrome. Again, this would have helped my brother detect it earlier. If you discussing your family history of cancer with your provider, is very important. Genetic testing is much easier and cheaper than it ever was before, and just really excited that there's some potential avenues for further prevention in the future. And so really delighted to be part of the research machine here.
Well, and thanks for the research you do, and more importantly, thanks for just sharing your story, because it all ties in together. Thank you for that. Lori, what's the big takeaway? What do you want folks who are listening to your story to take away, and what do you want to share about the importance of entering into clinical trials?
I think the takeaway would be, don't ignore like family history. Don't ignore your own personal care. Like, you have to keep up on those appointments and take care of yourself. And as far as being part of the vaccine, I couldn't think of any other way that I could help and like try to do something for my kids. And like, I just hear it in my head, my uncle saying, if only he could, you know, live long enough. And like, this is what he was talking about.
Yeah.
This is exactly what he was talking about. So there was no question I had to do it.
Thank you. Thank you for being a part of the trial. Thanks for sharing your story. Dr. Banzel, what's the big takeaway today?
To me, the big takeaway is that talk to your doctor and your families on Thanksgiving or other givings about family history, and don't be afraid of knowing your genetics. So it's scary and confusing, but don't be afraid of knowing your genetics of different diseases, because then you can empower yourself and do things which can help you and your family members and the overall society.
Well said. Thanks to all of our guests today. Thanks to our viewers for being with us. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday. Coming up Monday on the Morning Medical Update. Food allergies can hurt your stomach and your wallet. When Emily Brown went to the food pantry, she saw there were not many options for her 2 little girls. I'm Jessica Lovell on the next Morning Medical Update, raising awareness while turning adversity into opportunity. How this mom's experience is helping people in need with food allergies. Monday at 8.
Subscribe to our Morning Medical Update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcast. Now, everywhere podcasts are available.